del documental mientras me tomo el cafetito. A ver, tenéis el enlace, como siempre, exclamación en EVA, como sabéis, en EVA, patrocinador del canal. Y ahora con el Black Friday, pues, aparte de las ofertas, tienen el cashback, que es que hay un porcentaje que te lo devuelven. ¿Qué recomiendo de aquí? Alan Wake 2, juegazo. God of War 1, en PC, juegazo. Bueno, es juegazo, pero en PC va muy bien. El Red Dead Redemption 2 me está empezando a picar el hecho de tenerlo pendiente y no habérmelo pasado, por cierto. Debo decir. Debo decir también que no tengo tiempo. Ah, por cierto. He jugado al Steam Deck. He actualizado Steam Deck y lo estoy usando. ¿Qué os parece? Ya hablaremos de ello cuando haya jugado más. El Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate, este incluye el DLC de Yuffie, si no lo habéis jugado, no está mal de precio. Outerwise, como si vale 250 euros, juegardo. Esto es muy gracioso porque literalmente este es el juego de verdad y esta es la copia hecha por Ubishit, así que cómprate este, por favor, gracias. Sea of Stars, jugué la mitad o así y no acabo de... Stray es costra. El God of War Ragnarok, juegardo. Y 10% de cashback. Tiene 5 euros. Splatoon 3. ¿Qué ha sido de Splatoon 3, por cierto? Tengo curiosidad. Y luego, pues, el tema de tarjetas y demás, ¿no? Pues de aquí, personalmente, Alan Wake 2 serían 43, menos 4 euros más, bueno, 4,3 euros por el... Pues no está mal, 30 y algo. Joder, es un juego nuevo. Es literalmente un juego de salida. God of War se quedaría en 30 por ahí, ¿no? Juegardo. Tío, me pica un montón el Red Dead Redemption 2, 25. Es la edición especial. Yo lo tengo en Steam. No sé qué edición tengo, pero me pica un poquito, Pero bueno, eso. Gracias a Neva por patrocinar el canal un mes más. Y vamos a vernos una cosa... Ay, no he puesto el... No he puesto el tweet. Un segundo. Tengo aquí el documental este que ha sacado Valve. Valve ha sacado un documental por su 25 aniversario. Y lo tengo aquí. Dura una horita, la cosa es verlo. Dura una horita sobre el 25 aniversario de la salida del Half-Life 1. Y lo hace en no clip. Entonces podemos verlo, ¿no? Tranquilamente, con un café, ¿o qué? Espera, te voy a poner... Es que no me acordé, un segundo. Ay, normalmente me acuerdo, pero como me estaba haciendo el café, se me ha olvidado. Cortado expreso. Esto es un café con leche. A ver, sobre el... Vale, ya está. Ya he puesto el tweet. Vamos a verlo, ¿no? ¿Lo vemos o qué?
You just go over the mountains over here.
¿Está un poco fuerte o qué? Hay subtítulos en inglés. Es lo que hay. Es un documental hecho por NoClip, por cierto. O sea, lo paga Valve porque está en el canal de Valve. Pero lo que es el documental lo ha hecho NoClip y su crew. O sea, que de puta madre, porque el tío es súper bueno haciendo documentales de videojuegos. Uy. No decías que no le ponía leche al café. No puedo ponerle leche al café nunca más en toda mi vida. No le suelo poner leche al café, no. Pero soy un ser humano, puedo tomar decisiones y cambiar de idea y demás. La Virgen. Ay.
And you're in high desert. You get past Ellensburg and it's high desert. So I spent a lot of time out there getting reference. Most of the reference came from Eastern Washington. I did a drive out to the Columbia Gorge and took a lot of photos, and also a lot of just reference imagery of just like, hey, this is what desert looks like, and
¿Hablarán de
big
Black
cliffs
Mesa?
and stuff
Del,
like that.
bueno, del remake hecho por la comunidad. Dios,
That
el
drive
original,
was 2 days. It was 8 hours down, 8 hours back, and I'm not even sure I spent the night. I did. I must have.
Sí, está Half-Life gratis en Steam, pero ¿quién coño no tiene Half-Life hoy día? O sea, quien no tiene Half-Life 1 hoy día es porque no ha querido tenerlo nunca. O sea, honestamente.
Spent the night down.
¿Qué pasa? El chat del directo. Tiene bastante retraso. Bueno, el chat tiene retraso siempre, la verdad. El del directo no sé, pero... Lo que es el chat tiene bastante retraso, la verdad.
So while it was definitely made for the Southwest, the local reference was out in the Columbia Gorge.
Good morning and welcome to the Black Mesa
Este inicio es súper emblemático, Este inicio de un juego lo han copiado tantos juegos. Hace 25 años, Odio ese arma, tío. Marcó mucho el juego en la época. En la época, dices. Nah, fácilmente es quizá el shooter... bueno, junto con Doom. Doom y Half-Life deben ser los dos shooters más importantes de la historia.
I wasn't really used to big companies. When I started at Microsoft, it wasn't that big. It was like 1,500 people, like a big high school. 9 years later, it was significantly bigger. I'm thinking, oh, this place is too big, and that was still like 1996, so they had a long ways to go. I told my managers like a year before, like, I'm leaving in a year, and I'm going to start a game company. And
Co-founder
the
de
first person
Valve,
I talked to was
Mike Harrington
junto
con Gabe Newell.
But at that time, he was trying to do something within Microsoft, and by the time it made sense, John Carmack had convinced him to go work at id. So how could he say no to that? And then I was having lunch with Gabe, and I said, Gabe, I'm leaving. I'm just going to leave, and I'm going to start a game company. He goes, I want to leave. I want to start a game company. I'm like, all right, and that was it.
On the surface, we should have failed. And realistically, both Mike.
Este pavo con unas gafas, el puto Gabe Newell con unas gafas Nike, el hijo de la gran puta. Este tío tiene como 3 billion en el banco, el man, ¿sabes? Aparte de ser el dueño de Valve junto con otro man. Va con unas gafas Nike.
And I thought we would get about a year into it, realize we'd made horrible
Santa Claus,
mistakes, and go back to our friends at Microsoft and ask for our jobs back. But we did think that we knew a fair bit about software development, that there were expertise that goes into it. I think we also had some pretty clear ideas of how to design a company, right? So when we were building Half-Life, we were also designing Valve at the same time.
We had no plan except for, by then, like I mentioned, Michael had gone to id, and he said, oh, you're starting a game company, you have to use our engine. So Gabe and I flew down to Mesquite to meet id.
El primer Half-Life usó un motor que no era de ellos, luego hicieron el Source, que es suyo.
This is what you need to do to start a game company. You need to go out and hire some level designers and do that kind of thing. And we kind of understood the engineering part. And then, because we were Michael's friends, we walked away with the source code to Quake that day. We had no contract yet. We had kind of an idea of what it could be, and they just gave us a CD, and we had kind of the crown jewels of id, and that, game on.
I think most of us had no game development experience. We were either amateurs working in our homes at night for fun, or some people were from the software world, but they had never worked on a game. I think we had 3 or 4 people in the entire company who had actually shipped a game when we started Half-Life. We have to figure out what is Valve's first game. So we have to come up with an IP. So everything is done from scratch.
Gabe came into the office and he said, I read this story. I read this Stephen King story called The Mist. Stephen King, it's got monsters, people in a grocery store, fog comes in, monsters in the fog.
The Mist.
Use your imagination. We didn't want to write that as a game. That wasn't really the point, but it was just the tension and how it felt.
Well, it was interesting. At first, we had 2 games. Greg was working Prospero, and then Half-Life was originally called Quiver.
My job was then build a team and figure out another game for us to build. That'll be the second game Valve ships. What features should it have? How is it going to be different from a normal first-person shooter?
Every time the engine got a feature for Prospero, Half-Life stole it. And then Half-Life just started getting visually, you know, more impressive and cooler. And eventually it just, because it was going to ship sooner, it just stole the resources from Prospero, and Prospero just faded away.
So I had this character, had like a floating orb, and it wanted to have some, you know, effects on it. It's kind of magical energy, something. And so I worked with them on that and came up with the first version of the beam effects. And you know, they were using it, they were happy with it. And then people on Half-Life are coming over and like, what is that? How did you do that? So very quickly that got into Half-Life. The disaster sequence has kind of beam effects all over it, and we ended up using it for the Vortigons.
Like there are a bunch of things that we were doing that we thought would help us tackle the problem of what video games were. And what video games were a rapidly changing field where at the time 90% of video games failed to turn a profit. And a few percentage of them were very, very profitable, right? So it was a field that really valued talent.
Hay una cosa que me flipa de Valve y es que hacen cosas sin ningún tipo de... O sea, de la nada el otro día ponen un tweet, nueva Steam Deck, jaja, ya está, un abrazo. Y ayer o antes de ayer, aquí tenéis un documental de Half-Life por el 25 aniversario, adiós, hasta luego. Es como que no hacen fanfarria ni hacen nada, es simplemente, aquí tenéis una consola nueva. Hasta luego, buenas tardes. Ya no necesitan, eso es lo bueno, que no tienen que hacer nada. Si es que no tienen ni que poner un tweet. Con que tú abras Steam y te ponga nueva Steam Deck, que lo pone, ya está. Ese es el tweet, ese es el marketing, ¿no? Tienen la plataforma más grande que existe en PC. Pero coño. La OLED está muy bien. Es posible que me la haya comprado la versión de 1 tera.
Worked on Rise of the Triad first as a pixel artist, and then went with Duke Nukem, and then everything just went nuts. But I was sitting in my office one day, and my phone rang, just out of the blue, and I pick it up, and it's this recruiter. Eventually, he hooked me up with Gabe. It's a big surprise.
But then we started looking, you know, the nice thing that we had is we had a whole bunch of people in the world who had been working on mods, and so we could start looking at those folks. And that's where we hired a lot of our designers.
Steve and Guthrie.
Es que hay que pensar lo absurdamente importante que ha sido Half-Life, ¿eh? Porque de los mods de Half-Life apareció Counter-Strike, y de Counter-Strike, entre otras cosas, el género shooter entró al online con una fuerza en PC que ha provocado un montón de otros juegos. Es que no es una tontería el puto Counter y lo que ha significado y lo que significa hoy día todavía, pero es que creó toda una escena de juegos competitivos, que ya estaba StarCraft, lo sé. Pero ya me entendéis, es una de las piezas fundamentales de todos los eSports, el Counter-Strike, ¿sabes? Y es gracias a Half-Life también. Es que es súper importante en tantas cosas. Y luego, narrativamente, los shooters en primera persona significó un montonazo, ¿sabes? Y el diseño de los mapas y narrar con los mapas y demás. Es que fue fue una locura, tío, Half-Life. Y luego lo que significó para Valve como empresa, ¿sabes? Y luego que con Half-Life 2 lanzaron Steam, porque Steam se lanzó con la salida de Half-Life 2. O sea, es que hay un montón de... Es una locura, tío.
Other than Doug, Gabe sent him an email and they're like, who is this scammer? You know, never heard of these guys. Just kids, like barely 20, I swear. And they show up and they're just the most creative, brilliant.
Clever.
Fucking clever. Steve had the magic ability to make stuff fun.
The fact that those guys have been hired to go work on some game for some company, I think that was the start for a lot of people that something cool was going to happen, because those guys were already doing stuff that was cool.
And then Mark showed up, and like Mark actually knows how stories work, you know, beginning, middle, end, and all this stuff, and he had all sorts of great ideas, and he also would just, you know, bring good ideas out of everybody else as well.
Like the person who wrote more code on Half-Life was a chemistry major who decided to be an IP lawyer in Atlanta, right? And he ended up writing more code than anybody else. The creature designer for most of the AI for the creatures in the game was a manager at a Waffle House. It's not like there are a bunch of people that you could say, oh, this person, you know, has a PhD in video game design. It was that combination of both finding those people when it wasn't necessarily easy to find them at that stage in the video game industry, and then also convincing them that it was a better place to work than anybody else.
Y luego hicieron el Source, que fue súper importante para ellos, ¿eh?
One of the things that I definitely learned was how to hire engineers. And you know, we needed some engineers.
For us anyway, we had licensed ID's engine, you know, we're using the Quake engine. And one of the things me and some of the other engineers, probably Ken, were talking about was if it would be possible to use the save system to kind of like join our levels together in a really seamless way. So you get to the end of a level, save stuff, and then load some of it on the next level. And have it just feel like,
de ahí viene la mierda. Pues eso se lo llevaron al Source, Eso se lo llevaron al Source,
And you would have a little stop for the level to transition. And so he wrote that code leveraged on top of just the save load code to do the transitions. And I think in Half-Life 1 we got most of the transitions were, you know, a second or two.
You know, I remember when we went from 8-bit to 16-bit, like, hey, we don't have to have all our textures fit in a certain, you know, 256 colors. That was a huge liberation.
The two tech investments we made for Half-Life was to get to 16-bit color and skeletal animation for all the monsters.
But at the time, it was completely revolutionary. Your Quake characters were, it's like a text file of vertex positions over time.
I wanted so much more animation, and I wanted the animators to have the freedom to put in 100, 200, 500 frame of animation, if not more. And then you can do all sorts of other things because you have a skeleton, so it's like, oh, I can hook on a gun to a character. I can start to make changes of characters and replay the same
Uno de estos doctores es el de Half-Life 2,
we use most of the same model, so we can swap out heads, we can swap out this, we can swap out whatever.
Like all the technology that went into the game to make it as fun as it is was not available one generation before. So licensing the Quake engine, which was, you know, very mature and had level designers who'd grown up just goofing around with it.
I wasn't heavily into scripting since back into Doom. Like my old Doom levels have a lot of weird, odd events in them. I think I asked Ken, is it possible that I could, you know, have access to the character's animation, like a trigger? Like what I mentioned, I could make the guys go into an animation, I could make them run, and then I would configure everything. It was all hack. This is total hacky stuff. And that is mostly what I built, was like things like characters reacting and jumping out are made to look like, or I'd use a push brush to throw a head crab out to make it look like it launched at something.
Or if a loud sound happened,
they would respond,
would cower.
Gabe's dictate was, as you walked forward, something needs to happen like every 3 to 5 seconds. Yeah. The player stands still,
Didn't have to be much.
Universe can be quiet. But if they move forward, if they're active, the universe needs to play back something, needs to do something, even if it is a scripted sequence or
even just an interesting sign or something.
Or a sound or some vignette or something. So I came up with this interaction method where you could do little AIs where the characters would talk and interact with you a little bit. And then we wanted to do spectacle.
Bueno, y esto que estáis viendo está mucho mejor hecho que como estaba en la época, lo digo porque
you need to run here and then jump
está
into this
escalado
animation,
muchísimo.
And then have a bunch of you all synchronize your animation because it's somebody flying through the air, they're smashing something, or they're doing something like
resolución que no
era la época, te lo digo yo. Figure out like, oh, this is real easy to break. That was the roughest thing about scripted sequences, where you'd have like a head crab jumping on a scientist or something, and it's like, yeah, it works totally fine 90% of the time, but some people just sprint right at the scientist, and sometimes we have to put them behind glass. And
sometimes getting the level designers making the player want to do the thing that gives them the most fun is a very subtle art.
The tentacle sequence is probably the one I remember the most.
You're playing it, right?
En este punto juego, en el Half-Life 1 vuelas,
because you had your
cuando
triggers,
andas, corres
and we wanted it to be triggered. So by the time you start to see it, you see the scientist flying through the air and hitting the wall. Then you could look in and you could see the scientist being carried away. The tentacle itself is separate; it's on its own, and you bring the two together, mesh them together, and
boom.
Y como está hecho con el motor, bueno, ahora el actual ya lo puedes jugar, o sea, el Half-Life 1 lo puedes jugar con SOS, pero que no sé si se mantiene en el SOS, supongo que sí, el Bunny Hop creo que viene de ahí.
A little bit more than just ambience.
Nunca lo había pensado, pero es verdad que tiene un rollo de Myst. Es verdad, Joder, no lo había pensado nunca, de estar en un sitio encerrados y que esto ocurra a tu alrededor. Eso es de Myst.
So originally they were designed to sort of be behind glass. They were just designed to be spectacle.
Yeah, a little vignette.
And then all of the level designers like, no, I'm gonna put that right in front of you. And I'm like, oh God, how am I supposed to make this work? It's not supposed to do it.
Get away from there, Freeman. I'm expecting an important message.
The run speed for the player was so insane.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was like, what, 25 miles an hour or something?
It was sprinting, it was...
You could get so far, so fast.
Lo que acabo de decir, corres un huevo en este
juego. You'd either have to make the scripted sequence like so quick that you could barely see what's happening. Most people weren't looking in the right place anyway, so you'd have to like get their attention with like a particle or a sound or lighting or something, and then you wanted them to see what was happening. But when we play tested, and if like a scientist was like being pulled into a vent or something, like people wouldn't just stop and like, oh, sometimes they would be like, oh wow, look at that. They just run straight ahead and just start shooting.
It's hard when you think back to it to recognize that those kind of interactive moments were so new. Like people just hadn't seen them.
It was worth it because no other games were doing that. No other games had that interactivity. No other games had that spectacle playing out in front of you. And it just added that whole feel of Half-Life. Gabe had started to develop this theory around interactivity, and the environment needed to let you do what you wanted and then react to it. So if you did something, if you shot your gun, there needed to be a bullet hole in the wall. If you did a thing, people needed, other characters needed to react. The world is acknowledging you exist. The world is acknowledging all your actions. And that's this huge part of reinforcement.
And you'd have these conversations where you'd be sitting in a design review and somebody'd say, that's not realistic. And you're like, okay, what does that have to, explain to me why that's interesting, because in the real world, I have to write up lists of stuff I have to go to the grocery store to buy. And I've never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun. And so we had to come up with some notion of what fun was. We knew it was an ad hoc definition, and it was the degrees to which the game recognizes and responded to the player's choices and actions, right? In behavioral science, you would say we were explicitly talking about what were reinforcers and what the reinforcement schedules were, right? At that point in time, that was a useful way of making design decisions. The point I would make is, if I go up to a wall and shoot it, to me, it feels like the wall is ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me. So it is to me, I was trying to convey to the user a sense of, yes, you were making choices. Yes, you were progressing. Which meant the game had to acknowledge that. If you shoot at a wall, there have to be decals. If you kill a bunch of Marines, the Marines have to run away from you, right? You have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to the choices and actions and progressions that you've made. Otherwise, it loses any sort of impact.
Porque Half-Life 3 realmente tenemos el Half-Life Alyx, aunque es VR, en fin, bla, bla, todo lo que tiene.
Ted and I, we were on the same page in terms of what the game should look like, which would be just sort of alien in a very naturalistic kind of way. Like these are creatures from another dimension, another planet that look like they evolved in a way, and Chuck had he came from Duke Nukem. He made a bunch of monsters that went in a sort of a different direction, and for a while the game had a hard time coalescing around a single vision.
All the ones that looked like genitals were Ted's. And all the ones with shiny bits.
Me para exportarlo de VR. Hay un mod para jugar al Half-Life Alyx en VR, pero es que
that was a thing when I first came in.
Half-Life Alyx es un juego VR. Si no lo juegas en VR no tiene sentido.
Find the
Literalmente
harmony
no tiene
between the
sentido.
two to make it work. Yeah. Ted he really liked the Wayne Barlow aesthetic, and I had a little bit different, but it worked. Ted made these really weird. He did the head crab. You know, that's pretty much the symbol of it all. And I remember taking his head crab and putting it on a scientist and making the zombie. Right. Well, we pretty much we talked, and it's like, okay, you do that, and Ted did the soldiers, I did the scientists, I did a lot of the aliens, and with the Hornet gun, I did the Hornet gun for that one as well too. You know, the alien slave. Well, I did some animations for the bull squid or bull chicken.
El Half-Life 1 es mucho más raro que el 2. El 2 se fue, como ya había ocurrido la invasión, el 2 se fue más por el tema de las físicas y la conducción
If it's got
y demás.
a lot of flesh on it, maybe too much.
Yeah, that's a
El 1 es mucho
You can always
más raro.
tell Ted's designs because they're
Black
much
Mesa
more.
lo llegaron a acabar, sí, pero Black Mesa no lo hace Valve, pero está
Aquarium
acabado, sí.
and/or, you know, like unspeakables. You know.
Oh, Big Mama! I forgot about Big Mama. Oh
It's
God!
like, you know, it's a testicle, right? It's like
so disturbed.
I concepted a guy in sort of a NASA spacesuit, a scientist guy. He was actually modeled after a couple of programmers I know. Big, beefy, bearded Linux programmers, you know. And so that's where the HEV suit sort of emerged out of. There was a lot of desire for not having a space marine or a soldier be the guy. And then Chuck Jones went off and did a pretty different version.
Pero es que hasta, porque antes cuando he dicho lo de que Half-Life ha sido súper importante, que han hecho Halo también. ¿Sabes de dónde viene el traje de Halo, verdad?
I remember telling myself, it's like anytime you make a screenshot, make sure it's good, because you don't know where this is going to appear again.
We didn't know that.
And Ivan is the prime example of that one. So, you know, you're looking at, well, go look at Quake.
¿Te imaginas que tu abuelo en la comida de Navidad te está hablando de cuando hizo Half-Life con sus colegas?
And you're always hearing, don't put too many polys in it. And it's like, okay, so Ivan got the square head. And
what?
It was kind of an early, just a rough prototype of a Gordon Freeman baby. And I remember we didn't know what Gordon looked like. So it's like I was looking for somebody and I found Mike Harrington. It's like, Mike, what does Gordon look like? I don't know. Put yourself in there. It's like, oh, okay. And so I went in and put kind of my likeness on the early Gordon model in the game. And it kind of stayed
Did
there.
you have a ponytail?
Well, I was ex-tattoo artist, so yeah, I definitely had that. I don't have anything to work with now, but yeah, that point I had a ponytail on.
If you play the game, you know that it's Chuck. If you play multiplayer and you see the model, it's
But yeah, if you look on the back of that, there's this little four triangles, and he's got a little ponytail back there. I did the G-Man, and again, that one was Gabe was talking about the Cigarette Man from X-Files. So we needed our own equivalent of that.
Because after a while, after playing with the game for a long time, people realized like, hey, we made this character, and just in this one office scene in the beginning, you know, where he's behind the window and he's talking to a scientist or something, and he's like, he looks really creepy. It was late in the day that we thought, oh, okay, well, he's going to be the big bad behind all of this. Like scatter him around in places that you can't get to him, but he's there mysteriously.
There wasn't enough in the beginning of the game. It's like we need another monster. Head crabs weren't enough. It got kind of repetitious. I think I grabbed Ted and said, I need them to do this and this. And so he whipped it out in not much time at all. I'm gonna get the timing just right, and I have no time to do this. So I'm just gonna bang it out. And then once it was working, everybody said, "Oh, just go back and sprinkle them back in the maps." And that was this.
Because we introduced them a little earlier than we were planning.
Yeah, because they ended up being they weren't real tough. They weren't supposed to be tough.
But they were ranged.
But they were ranged, and they were fun, and they had a big show, and like that was showing off a bunch of stuff.
Esos sonidos los tengo metidos en el cerebro porque son los sonidos del Counter 1.4.
That was it. It was like,
1.3,
okay, I have a week and a half. It was already done, it was already all modeled, already all animated, and the requirement was it couldn't have any new animations and any new anything. So had to come up, I grabbed a bunch of Steve Bond's AI and banged that thing out. I built a level super crude, but it had all the right spacing and all the right heights and all the right geometry.
Esta habitación es muy Counter.
Again, it's
muy
just a presentation
mapa de
where
Counter
this creature gets to shine, this enemy gets to shine, and is your entire focus for that scene. And
¿Os acordáis del mapa del Counter viejo que era un mapa de hielo
just
que
takes
solo
place in a
tenías
different fashion than other encounters? You know,
Empezabas a
when you
ir a
get
tres
knocked out,
carriles.
there's all kinds of like the
Ya
lights
está.
go out and
Ese
you
era
get
el mapa.
dragged through
Era un
corridor and
cuadrado.
so, again, it's something you remember in the game.
12.000, sí, con las armas en el juego. 12.000 horas jugué ahí en el Ciber, tío. Pero muchísimo, ¿eh? El poco dinero que tenía me lo gastaba en el Ciber jugando al Counter y al Warcraft 3.
We just did a lot of playtesting and did a lot of level building and used all of the monsters and you used everything that we had developed and started seeing which ones kind of stuck out a little oddly. You know, like we had the Hound Eyes that Ted had concepted and Kelly had done great sounds for them. And so they seemed like a very oddly plausible sort of alien creature. And Chuck did what we called the Panther Eye, which was this big Black Panther looking creature that also just had a big red eye for his face and a big shark fin coming out the back. And design-wise, he seemed like this is a very useful creature. You know, it's like when you design things, you know, you like to have a gradient of difficulty, a gradient of escalation in threat. And so if we had these Hound Eyes, then oh yes, this like Panther, bigger, scarier looking thing would be more of a threat. It was in the game for a long time and then sort of just worked its way out. Because folks couldn't find a way to incorporate a creature like that into the environment and make it seem reasonable.
The Stuka Bat was, it was something that I had did, just another creature from the air. We had the chub toad that we were going to use as a feeding animal to help, and yeah, they had a mechanic to where they were going to use this to distract monsters so you could possibly get by. And it pretty much reached fruition to where we created the object, but then again, time became the factor and it had to get cut.
Todas las texturas,
I grew up just outside
persona
DC, and so there's all these like big, really banal office buildings, and that's kind of the direction I went. So it started becoming a facility. And so I started making these kind of linoleum tiles and the drop ceiling, the concrete block wall, the black and white tile floor.
She was like the texture artist for for most of the game. Yeah. It's just an overwhelming amount of work.
Originally, I was hand painting all of the textures, and you can really see a shift in some of them where they go from hand painted to photo reference. The photo references are much, much better. So I was all over Seattle, Harbor Island, Gasworks Park, getting rusty metal things. What can I get good pictures of that is vaguely industrial and interesting to look at? And then how can we use this?
Joder,
And so, sides of box cars, and I don't know how many hallways in Half-Life are, the side of a train car kind of thing. The Kirkland Costco, a lot of time in the Kirkland Costco, getting just packages of, I don't know why I needed snacks or something.
Un año, Un año, tú.
The first year was all about opportunity, and it wasn't quite as focused. We were finding our footing.
We were getting into the 3 months before supposedly shipping in '97, and it's like, this isn't gelling. This is really not good. This is like, quick knockoff, cash grab, stupid, and let's not do that. There was a lot of disconnect between what all of the different groups were doing, what engineering was doing and what level design was doing and what animation was doing. We had a bunch of monsters that had no plans to get in the game because nobody else was assigned to work on them, and we had a bunch of levels that like, what's supposed to go in here? Oh, I don't know, everybody's gonna do a bunch of stuff, and like, no, that doesn't work that way.
So here we were, all these people doing all these cool things, and just everything's just this random collection of, oh, here's a cool moment and a cool this, and and then it's gone, and oh, now on to the next thing. Because the way we were building the game was every level designer was kind of his own silo, his own universe. And I think that just grew out of our kind of mod developer roots, but it wasn't cohesive, and it certainly didn't have a strategy for like maximizing any of that stuff.
You must have been in the meeting when we reviewed all the levels. It was like the first time everybody piled into a room, and Gabe had his crazy Hellraiser chair with the beautiful Mac monitor, and we played for 2 days. He played everyone's levels. But I remember one moment he turned around. He was like this with his hair. He's going, "We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail." And I was just like, it blew me away. I was like, oh shit, this isn't good.
We were doing our best trying to make this game and the story. And we had a schedule from Sierra, and it was a tight schedule. And we told them, like, we're not going to ship this. And we realized that you're not going to pay us to continue developing this, but we're going to do it anyway.
Late is just for a little while, suck is forever, right? We could try to force this thing out the door.
La famosa frase que también dijo
but that's
Miyamoto,
not the company we want to be. That's not the people we want to be. That's not the relationship we want to have with our customers.
And so we kind of, Kelly and I kind of sat down and sort of tried to take an inventory of all this cool stuff we had built, and why weren't we just, building more on top of that? And those discussions kind of led to us building this kind of design cabal process to try to give some cohesion to the game and kind of changing the way we were approaching it.
And so a cabal was a small group of people, multidisciplinary group. There's like an artist, level designers, engineers, everything in that. A small team that would write up a spec for a level. There was the arc that Mark had written, so we knew how that fit into the story.
And we got a small group of people together, and we started with the beginning, and we went through literally what map do we need to build to tell us the story we're going to have to tell, and then what does that connect to, and what's the next piece and the next piece.
The strongest and most influential thing that came out of them was, to me, the sketches, and they were really the visual meeting notes, right?
We came up with a formula for how that worked. We had a certain percentage of the time where you were fighting, a certain percentage of the time where you're exploring, a certain percentage of the time where you're solving puzzles. And so we could apply that uniformly through the game, and that worked pretty well.
Testing. Everything seems to be in order.
Good morning, and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train is provided for the security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
The whole opening of the game was specifically a reaction to how all the other first-person shooters were, whether they had cutscenes or not. Like sometimes, they would just open without a cutscene, but you're standing in a room with a gun and there's a thing attacking you. So we could look at examples of all that, and I think there was expectation that that's what.
Ya, en la época también me acuerdo de este inicio como si fuera
I can tell you the number of people who started up the game, were staring at it, and then accidentally bumped their mouse and realized this is live.
Yeah.
And as simple as that sounds, it was mind-blowing for so many people because there was too much going on. This isn't real time, this is a recording,
That was
el hecho de que te pudieran mover, que de repente te dieras cuenta que puedes mover el ratón.
A lot of the new
y te podían mover tú,
decías un momento. Well, what can we do that you could do this in a movie or a story, but nobody's doing this in first-person shooters.
You're this anonymous scientist, and you're riding on this train into work and rolled the credits at the beginning. It was kind of like a cinematic experience almost. I don't think games had really gone down that road. It's so funny to look at it now because it's so primitive, but at the time it felt like you were really in this Black Mesa world.
Pre-disaster survived from the first year, so a lot of that geometry was from that first version of the game, but in a very minimal way, right? Just the basic style of some of the hallways, the curved corners in the hallways, things like that. They more became sort of like Lego pieces that John could use and stitch together and extrude. And I know Brett did a lot of the raw geometry from pre-disaster, and then John did most of the work to ship it, and then the post and the train ride was all John, I think.
The Sector C, so those are heavily influenced by NASA control rooms, with my favorite green hammerite, really influenced a lot of like the starting. We started with the kind of the
dos modelos de científico o tres
y ya. And then there was just lots of hallways and people were getting lost, and I did the color stripes to help people follow them places.
One of the things that was actually super exciting was how quotidian a lot of it really was. You know, the lunchroom with the microwave, you press the button and it would go splat.
My God, what are you doing?
Yeah, all this work so you can start a microwave and blow up some soup, which was a reference to real life, because that happened regularly. Like, we regularly accidentally blew up.
It was mostly, wasn't it?
There were a few people who were just, you know, challenged with kitchen appliances. And you know, at one point we had a company fire. We had a lot of things going on in that kitchen.
All of that stuff had a real kind of eloquence that in the late 90s, in a world where everything was so over the top, you know, but we still got to go on flights of fancy.
Welcome to the HEV Mark IV.
I think like a super pivotal moment for me was when we came in this one morning and we saw the test chamber sequence that Kelly and John Guthrie and Wedge was in that office, and Dario Driller, they were all in this corner dark office where so much cool stuff happened. But so Kelly and John.
Yo, si no lo habéis jugado, más que jugar el primer Half-Life, o sea, esto que estáis viendo, que va a ser un poco duro, jugaos el Black Mesa, que es un remake del primer Half-Life con el motor del 2 y muy, muy, muy mejorado. Es un mejor videojuego a todos los niveles.
What to do. John and I talked about it. I went home that night and I sort of sketched out, like, you know, maybe we could do something cinematic.
¿Pero qué coño estás diciendo? ¿Cómo que Black Mesa no tiene nada que ver con Half-Life 1? Si es un remake del mismo puto juego, que es exactamente igual, menos el final, que el Shen está cambiado porque está alargado, y el resto del juego es un 95% igual.
They had audio, right? We had
yeah, it's like the heartbeat and the breathing, all that stuff was in there. And I played through it and it was like,
hombre, claro, se siente mucho más como Half-Life 2 en el movimiento y demás. Es mucho mejor. Half-Life 1 a día de hoy es durísimo de jugar porque es un juego muy antiguo y tiene... A ver, es un poco una puta mierda. Las cosas como son.
And it's this kind of
o sea, Black Mesa es un mejor videojuego a todos los niveles. Si queréis jugarlo a nivel de joder, pues como poner un libro antiguo, el hecho de jugarlo como una curiosidad de la industria, pues jugarlo, claro.
Personally, the difference between before the disaster sequence and after the disaster sequence, I felt we really I had an understanding that this product was going to be special, or it was going to be possible, it was going to be tied together. Whereas before that, there was a lot of really good stuff and a lot of little things all disconnected. But you guys managed to tie two very different parts of the game together really well. And I thought, oh, okay, now I feel like we're on a track for finishing this product. To me, it shifted my brain to have a lot of confidence that this product's coming together rather than I'm just generating a lot of content that exists independently of other content.
One of the ways we were funding our development was we sold a preview copy of Half-Life to a video card company, I forget which one. And so they had in their contract that we had to deliver it to them by a certain date. And we got like the first 3 levels done for them. It was really a good milestone for us, just, you know, from working as a company, because hey, there was a deliverable. We got it done. And, you know, we shipped it off to them. And then I swear the next day it leaked. And I was just livid at first, which was stupid. But I was just like, oh, I can't believe you guys let this get out. Like, you know, this wasn't us, you know. And then it turned into something amazing where people started playing it. And it was all over, and we started, you know, seeing it, you know, online, what people
Les pasó también con el Half-Life 2,
I forget
lo que
which
se liqueara, Half-Life 2 se liqueó
usually
también.
We don't review, you know, beta software, but they reviewed it and said, this is awesome. And that gave us a tremendous amount of confidence. You know, it was an outside validation of what we were trying to do, you know, that it was the right thing.
Como odio este arma, tío. La sensación de ese arma es que no le das a nadie nunca.
I think just with first-person shooters already.
El Half-Life 2, bueno, piratearon. Un hacker se metió en su base de datos y robó código. Sí. Que luego creo que se fue a la cárcel. El tío, creo que lo llevaron a la cárcel, juraría. O le cayó una vela de Dios.
Drive you to get another weapon.
That was a lesson in how to make all of your weapons as orthogonal as possible, so each one did something completely different. All of the crazy weapons, those are my fault. So I did like the rocket launcher and the Gauss gun and the snarks.
Oh, I like snarks. Snarks always made me laugh. It was just always funny to watch people run away from the snarks.
The squeak grenade. It's called the snark, but I wanted something, little creature that you could bring up and hold and you could throw it out and it would just start running. Because people were camping and everybody hated campers at that point. So you wanted the anti-camp weapon.
Sí, es verdad. Algo así le hicieron, ¿verdad? Al hacker, que Valve le ofreció trabajo, le dijeron, ven, hostia, nos has hackeado, que de puta madre, vente a las oficinas, que así te contratamos como no sé qué de seguridad. Y le esperaba el FBI. Creo, algo así. Juraría, que fue algo así.
SWAT. So that was the inspiration for that particular animation. And then the other, that big alien creature with the, we needed some kind of alien weapon. Drew that one, built that one, animated that one, but that was also another one that whenever you could get in a corner and just shoot them in the air because the hornets would track. I think that was the biggest thrill, is brainstorming these with your crew, making them, building them, putting them in the game, and then playing with them, and then they're fun.
So there's sort of a trope of having a melee weapon. I think it was Steve Bond and Ken Birdwell and I were saying we wanted a device where the world was reacting to you. It really goes back to that theory of fun. But we were just running around like idiots, smacking the wall. It's an odd thing to know in retrospect, but at the time it felt profoundly satisfying to be able to smack walls. And that was just an example of how that fairly abstract notion of what fun was ended up translating into a set of decisions that were really visceral. When you're going around whacking a wall, a crowbar is an obvious thing to whack the wall with.
Se nota. Se nota, porque los soniditos de Half-Life 1, Jesus Christ, los grabó con el micro que usan los pilotos para hablar en los aviones. La madre que los parió,
If the sound could let you know what's going to happen, that's really
No, sí, están guay, los sonidos son súper, hoy en día ya son súper
level design and monster design.
No sé.
Communicating because the AI is often hidden from the player. So we use the sound to broadcast the internal state of the AI.
Mira qué sonidos, por Dios. Además, recuerdo que era algo que está súper fuerte. Como que siempre que jugaba era como, me cago en Dios, qué fuerte está el juego. Como que siempre estaba fuerte, tío. Como que suenan súper clipeados al máximo, ¿sabes?
What's about to happen. So it was really important to try to keep those states distinct so that as you play the game, you're actually, whether you're aware of it or not, you're starting to be able to tell what's about to happen.
We knew he was a musician too, so he could do sounds, but you know, he also decided he was going to write the sound engine. And then he wrote the soundtrack. And he'd never written a soundtrack before, and he wrote the whole, soundtrack for the game, and it won an award, and it was crazy.
There just weren't that many of us. I had a little bit of a background playing music. I understood the sound engine really well.
Como que a bit of a background, y el hijo de puta hace una banda sonora le dar un premio. Estamos
tontos. I understood enough about the level design side that I could kind of connect those things a little bit. The sounds could come from anywhere, and then I just heavily modified them. Usually those are animal sounds, reversing, changing the pitch, chopping them up and rearranging them. Head crabs were rats. The little squeaky, yeah, that's a rat slowed way, way down and then reversed.
Yeah, the DSP stuff was another cool thing that Kelly built. When you got an event, it sounded like you were an event, and that wasn't really happening, I guess, at least in Quake and other games I was playing back then.
Que cambie como suena,
have these huge silos, these cavernous spaces. The day they had their own echoey DSP.
No recuerdo casi nada de la música. Estoy seguro que te acuerdas cuando sales fuera por primera vez y viene el helicóptero que suena música súper fuerte, para variar. De repente, como música de acción. Y en cuanto te metes otra vez por la escalera hacia abajo, desaparece la música. Y tú, ok.
Kelly tells me, oh God, Chuck Jones asked him if the characters could speak and have their mouths move. And Kelly said, you know, that's super easy. You know, I could just look at the audio and see if they're talking and do that. But like getting their mouth to move is stupid, he says to me. And I look, Chuck Jones told me the same thing. I told him making the mouths move was super trivially easy, but knowing when they're talking and knowing how to follow the envelope of the speech would be impossible. And Kelly and I just both looked at each other and like, oh. And so I went back to my office and he went back to his office. And I think within an hour, the characters were talking and their mouths were moving. And it was only because we sat there at lunch bitching about an animator who was 100% right.
Why are you leaving me here?
Scientist conversations, Kelly and I made that. When they're next to each other, one scientist will occasionally play a question and the other one will give him an answer. And it's not a script, you know, it just it might not always make sense.
I am rather looking forward to this analysis, aren't you? I don't think so.
But it had a bunch of personality. It was really cool. And I worked on getting those guys.
Pasaba mucho en la época esto que los actores de doblaje eran gente del estudio.
When we first added the ability for scientists to respond to the
porque no tenían dinero o no sabían a quién coño contratar y eran ellos doblando. Lo que pasó en System Shock 2, que las voces son gente del estudio y se nota un huevo porque hablan tomando.
And one of them looks at you
O sea, que no son actores, obviamente.
And then they explode into a pile of jibs
es un poco como, oh wow, oh vamos a morir, oh no, algo así. En el System Shock y tú, a ver.
I hadn't really started working on the biggest part of the game, which I ended up shipping, which was surface tension, prior to then. A lot of the work that I had done was the Alien Research Labs, which turned into questionable ethics, and all of that was ditched. There were some concepts made it through, but everything was rebuilt from zero. But you know what did make it through was Power Up. Yeah, basically that geometry survived completely intact. It was so closely designed for that creature that because the creature survived, the levels survived along with it. Yeah, there's this sort of central
la sensación en Half-Life 1 de que comes daño todo el rato, tío, por cómo funciona el juego y cómo funciona la hit detection y demás de los golpes, como que siempre te dan en este juego, tío. Algo te da siempre, las explosiones, la gente, los rayos láser, algo te va a dar siempre, tío. Es un horror.
And you have to drain the generator and then you can switch the power on and then you can take the train out. Yeah, I remember him being totally central to this whole thing. And then, well, how do we block the player? Which is, I mean, that's pretty much like design point number one for all level design. Okay, well, how do we prevent the player from just walking straight out through the exit? And you design backwards from there.
In the first year, we built a lot of world space, a lot of track as we call it, and the programmers would try to fit the AI into the existing maps. What we did the second year was we built the AI in very constrained environments that showcase the AI. Let's make the ideal space for the AI and then give that to the level designers to incorporate those elements into their map so that it worked better and was more interesting. And that Gargantua was an example of that. And the grunts especially.
Yeah, we had the AI that Steve had been working on, and he had designed all these interesting encounters with them just in his test map, and so he had them up high and down low, and so basically we just could re-leverage that.
Aquí cómo lo harán, por cierto, porque creo que en algunos juegos, cuando tú estás en un tren o algo así, el tren no se mueve, lo que se mueve es todo el escenario a tu alrededor. Por cómo funcionan las físicas o no sé qué mierda de que tú estás en un tren y el tren se mueve.
Steve Bond, like I mentioned earlier, was this
really
young guy
nivel que se
who's
mueve y
been
tú
making
estás
mods
fijo
and QuakeC,
en el carro,
really the designer
todo
for
el
so
nivel
much of
entero
the
a tu
AI, all the stuff that's good about the soldiers, the grunts you fight in Half-Life.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a language we could sort of use.
En Fallout 3 llevas el tren en la cabeza. Se han hecho muchas cosas de esas, O sea, es muy normal ese tipo de cosas. Por muy raro que parezca.
To go in general are interesting places. So, you know, the AI had a little bit of help.
Lo que os dije al principio de Skyrim, el carro, que se jugaba en PC, de repente el carro sale volando y demás. Eso pasaba por el tema del frame rate, que nuestras físicas estaban enlazadas al frame rate. Y luego seguía pasando y se dieron cuenta de que había una mosca flotando por ahí y la mosca tenía collision box por algún motivo. Entonces colisionaba tu carro con la mosca y la mosca no podía, o sea, le habían puesto collision box, pero no habían puesto física, o sea, como que no podía moverse, nada podía empujarla. Entonces el carro tocaba la mosca y salía volando. Y eso seguía pasando hasta cuando salió la Special Edition en PC, que yo me la compré. Y seguía pasando, y te hablo de hace no tantos años. Si te chocaba la mosca, salía volando. Y seguía ocurriendo.
Rails electric. It's like, well, maybe that'll teach them to bring the train with them. But the basic idea is, let's explore that and then also reveal some of the hidden deep parts of the base, the abandoned areas where you might get a lot more of the Zen creatures. We had designed some of the ones that didn't make it into the game to appear there, bats that would dive.
Creo que por eso hay algo del Half-Life 1 que hoy en día jugarlo no me gusta. Es esa sensación de que siempre recibes un daño, tío. Y lo poco precisa que parece ese arma. Casi todas las armas parecen muy poco precisas, lo rápido que te mueves. Los sonidos tan fuertes, es como muy incómodo, ¿sabes? Voy a jugar a Half-Life 2 Update. O sea,
there's a really good sketch that Kelly Bailey made, which basically charted surface tension, and it was pretty extensive. Like, it went through the cliffside and it went through areas where tanks were and like a lot of soldier holdouts. Yeah, it even went through the desert with the cactuses and the helicopters, and then across a dam. It was pretty extensive. When I saw that sketch, I was so motivated to just start building all of that stuff.
So I ran ahead with a lot of level design and a lot of geometry, and it seems like a lot of it stuck in some way or another, which is really amazing. I did the dam, which was funny. I just did that in a day. Like, it was like about 4 or 5 hours. I did a Hoover
Era
dam.
por aquí que tenías que meterte por el agujerico.
I saw a concept of the
por un agujerico de ventilación.
Harry Teasley built that render of the skybox. Yes. And I just thought, holy crap, this is perfect for vertigo. Like, whatever we do here, we have to play on vertigo and like narrow little edges and places you would like to normally dodge a grenade, but you can't.
And that's the moment. That's really the big part of that level, is that reveal. And the play is kind of supports it afterward. Yeah. The helicopter comes in, you're fighting the helicopter, which is awesome.
Todos los sonidos clipeadísimos.
First of all, I had a bunch of textures, and then every time I made new ones, whoever was working on the new levels would be like, "Oh, fresh textures! I'm going to use those." Somebody making another level would start using them, and I was like, "No, this is chaos. We need to restrict this." So I started naming the texture sets by the level that they were made for. I was trying to enforce some sort of like visual cohesion, and so that really ended up working.
There was one level I did, it was the introduction of the sort of the bounce pads, the alien bounce pads in the real world. Because, story-wise, like, okay, you're getting closer to hitting the alien world. So I was, let's get a little bit of alien world infection into the real world. So I had done it just as a visual thing. John Guthrie made it 10 times better. And that's actually where he found the photo of my daughter, because I didn't put my daughter in Gordon's locker. I hid her in like this destroyed office someplace, as a little Easter egg for myself. And John went and put my daughter's photo in Gordon's locker, which I think was a
Imagina decirle a tu hija, por cierto, sales en Half-Life. Está guapo eso, Saber que sales en Half-Life. Está chulo eso, tío.
I still get questions about stuff that I spent 5 minutes on 25 years ago from people who've now thought about this for 25 years, and they're thinking that there's 25 years worth of development went into this. I'm like, on some level, when you start talking about lore, I'm like, well, there's Black Mesa. That was just a matter, we needed a name for something that was evocative.
In that entrance, when you get off the train and there's that lobby where there's a big map on it, and when we were making that map, that was fairly early on, I put a dot in New Mexico. And then that turned into, I think Mark saw that and he was like, oh, where is that? This is where we are. And then he named it Black Mesa.
That is a favorite thing of mine, actually. If you come up with a name for something, then and it evokes something, then you don't have to write the whole story.
Diablo Plains. ¿Lo habéis visto? Había un montón de nombres.
Everybody knows more about it than you do, so you don't have to answer those questions. You just keep raising questions and make the mystery kind of thing.
Like dialogue came in later. Also, a lot of the scripted sequences came in later. And those helped to kind of sharpen
esa es la voz de uno de
los...
El tío ese te puso la voz a uno de los actores, ¿no?
To get up to the surface and then like, oh no, they're not here to help us.
The whole thing about diegetic writing, right? Like keeping the exposition in the game instead of outside the game. You know, I give a lot of credit to Mark.
After playtests, we'd realize that maybe you need more of a dialogue cue about something.
That's when we started to do like scientists who were literally pop up in a corner and go that way. There's a few of those that we stuck in right at the end when we'd like, well, we get one more session with Hal. He can say, go down here, you know, go around that corner.
Well, so much for the government. Their idea of containment is to kill everyone associated with the project. Judging from your hazard suit, I'd say you were part of what went wrong.
I knew Hal from San Francisco as an artist, cartoonist. He was also an animator and an actor in some science fiction movies. So when we got down to the wire, we did a bunch of voice casting and nothing was right. And I just kept thinking of Hal. And I finally just called him and said, Hal, I want you to talk to people here so they can hear your voice. And I got him on a speakerphone. And I had a bunch of people gathered in my office. I'm like, okay, Hal, well, what would you like me to say? And everybody was like, this is him. This is the guy.
Why do we all have to wear these ridiculous ties?
Another interesting voice thing was the G-Man. So we liked Mike Shapiro's work. So we knew we wanted to use him, but we brought him in to do Barney and also the G-Man. So we did a take on all the G-Man lines with kind of a straight voice, and it was thinking that, okay, we have something safe, but we're not super excited about it, and give us something else. And he does this crazy lizard voice.
Tiene un toquecito de Harrison Ford, el tío ese,
our control for the time being, thanks to you. Quite a nasty piece of work you managed over there. I am impressed.
And we took it back, and everybody just loved the
este
crazy
tío
lizard
parece como
voice.
un Harrison Ford dibujado de memoria. Es como si dibujaras a Harrison, como si te dijera, dibuja a Harrison Ford de memoria y te saldría este pavo.
Just imagine his head floating
un poco, ¿a que sí?
in space as a baby.
¿A que sí? ¿A que es él, ¿Qué diría? Siempre se parece, lo puedo entender, y tú, es verdad que no sé dibujar mucho.
I went into Gabe's office and I demanded Gabe to either fire Ken or I quit. And Gabe just laughed at me.
Correct response from Gabe.
Yeah. I was like, oh.
Until Bill got there, I was the oldest guy there. It was hard because, you know, I had to go home in the evenings, whereas the young guys who just moved out from Florida or wherever, they did not have to go home in the evenings. I'd go home, see my kids when they were in bed. I would come back down the hill to Valve. Nobody else I worked with had to get up to get their kids off to school in the morning, but I did.
You're wired to just take full advantage of the situation. You put everything into it. So when we say we worked 18-hour days, that's no exaggeration.
Yeah.
Not at all. I can edit all day. I can design all day. I don't have to worry about anything. You know, two guys from Microsoft start a game studio with a bunch of incredibly capable, you know, with an incredible team. You're gonna push yourself harder than ever before.
También se juntan muchas cosas, obviamente.
I get it done in I come in.
Obviamente el crunch hoy en día sigue siendo un problema, ¿no?
And a lot of
y en la época también. Pero también eran gente muy joven, como podéis ver. Era gente muy joven haciendo algo como eran de los primeros haciendo algo. Entonces, claro. También cuando eres joven haces algo durante 12.000 horas. O sea, yo recuerdo, joder, con 18 años o por ahí, jugar 20 horas a algo. 20 horas de seguidas. Irme a la cama y levantarme al día siguiente, ir a la universidad, volver a casa. Un domingo, levantarme 20 horas, irme a la universidad sin apenas dormir, volver el lunes después de comer y jugar y seguir jugando como si nada, rollo, jaja. O sea, bien tranquilísimo. Y irme a la universidad y estar fresco allí, rollo, estar prestando atención en la universidad. Pero claro, tenía 18 años, 20. Ahora con 36 vengo del gimnasio y me tiro en el sofá y estoy... ¡Oh! ¡Oh! Pues así. Literal. Joder, con 20 años sales, bebes como un perraco, o sea, vuelves a casa borracho, pero borracho como un hijo de la gran puta. Te pegas una ducha, te vas a la cama y al día siguiente te levantas fresquísimo. Te levantas bien, rollo. Ah, estoy bien, la verdad es que tampoco estuvo tan mal. Te has bebido 8 cubatas. O sea, me bebo eso hoy y no llego a casa directamente. Pero es que al día siguiente no soy ni persona.
The classic, well, I'll come in at 1 and then goof around for a while and then work late into the late at night. I was employee 17. There was a woman that was the kind of the office manager, and eventually Mona Lisa Guthrie came in.
Me pregunto si todos estos tendrán shares de Valve. Por haber sido de los primeros, igual. Como igual les dieron un 1%
I decided to become a baseball fan
en su momento, que no valía nada.
After the birth of my first daughter. So she's the one in Gordon's locker, Isabel, but she's very special needs. She's 25 today. Cognitively, she's about 3 years old. So after her birth, in the middle of Half-Life production, it was really hard. It was really hard because we were getting about 2 hours of sleep at a stretch because she had to be fed through a tube in her stomach every 2 hours. I had just a difficult time relating to the world.
Esto me flipa. O sea, los veo y digo, tío, son niños. Son críos. ¿Qué hacen teniendo hijos, tío? Es que me flipa. O sea, son niños. Veo eso y digo, tío. Que mis padres son los primeros, ¿eh? Mis padres ya me tuvieron a mi hermano con 16 y pico y a mí con 18. O sea, mis padres eran no jóvenes, ultra jóvenes. ¿Sabes? Cuando mis padres tenían la edad que yo tengo, 36, mi madre con 36, mi hermano tenía 20 años. Cuando mi madre tenía mi edad. Mi hermano era un pavo de 20 años y yo tenía 18 y estaba empezando la universidad. Y mi madre tenía mi edad, la que tengo yo hoy. Duro, ¿eh? Lo piensas y dices, Jesus Christ, con mi edad... O sea, imagínate que ahora yo tengo 2 hijos y entran por aquí, os los presento, y uno tiene 20 años y el otro 18. Y digo, se va a la universidad aquí. ¿Sabes? Así eran mis padres. Y yo los veía... Cuando iba a la universidad, o cuando yo empecé la universidad, yo veía a mis padres súper viejos. Sí, y yo viendo Jujutsu Kaisen y antes encendiendo la Steam Deck para actualizarla. Y ahora estoy viendo un documental de Valve aquí en directo. No va ni en broma. O sea, es que es una... Es tan diferente mi vida.
And she was a baby. I had a hard time just talking to people because I was just kind of tired and angry all the time. Yeah, my wife, she worked at Valve for a while. She did a bunch of textures for the game. Like I said, she did those soda machines. She did just a bunch of level textures. She textured Big Mama, the sort of boss creature. She textured him. But when Isabel arrived, she obviously had a lot of issues. So Yachts had to stop working and stay with her at home. And it was the last year of Half-Life, and we pretty much crunched that whole year. So I was at work a lot. It was hard. It was definitely a hard year.
Entiendo que esto es la vida de mucha gente. Obviamente están haciendo un videojuego y lo que tú quieras, pero que entiendo que es la vida de mucha gente porque yo de pequeño yo lo veía con mi padre, por ejemplo, que no lo veía, que yo me levantaba y mi padre ya se había ido a trabajar y cuando yo volvía del colegio no había vuelto todavía y mi padre volvía por la noche. O sea, se pasaba todo el día afuera. Todo el día, todos los días. Y luego los domingos otro trabajo porque si no, no teníamos dinero. Pero me rompe la cabeza el concepto de estar trabajando 12 horas todos los días. O sea, vives literalmente única y exclusivamente para trabajar. No haces otra cosa. O sea, no tienes hobbies, no haces nada con tu vida. Y ni siquiera tienes dinero para viajar o ver el mundo o hacer cosas. Es como que tu vida está reducida a trabajar todo el día, todos los días. Yo me pego un tiro directamente. O sea, me vuelo la cabeza. Así te lo digo. O sea, no quiero existir. Para existir así, no, gracias. Es como... Nope. Chen fue una cosa, porque acabó siendo un poco regulero en el original.
Games have often had this thing where they're just a little too attached to Star Wars, Blade Runner, Aliens. So it wasn't that hard to try to get people to go, let's think of something really alien. Like what Zen was initially was you're going to go inside a huge alien organism and kill it or figure out how to turn it on or off or something like that. I didn't know we couldn't actually do that or what was involved.
What does it mean to have alien architecture or a planet that's biologically defining the structures in it, as opposed to what the tools were good at, which is making rectangles?
And then slowly it scaled back till it was more and more corridors, and that everybody was really good at.
People were finishing up stuff and I was still working on Zen because it was like it went through a lot of iteration, or at least we're trying to figure out what it was. Different people were taking swings at it, either in static
Weren't
concepts.
you under a bit of a timeline crunch for it as well?
Yeah, it was the end of the game.
Yeah.
I wanted to cut stuff out and they're like, no, leave it in. I'm
Right.
like, yeah, but I don't have any support for this. Right. And then after a lot of it was built,
De nuevo,
it was
si
like,
jugáis al,
change the
si
gravity
queréis jugar,
and give
jugar
you
al
a
Black
jump pack.
Mesa.
That came later.
Porque tiene todo lo de Shen está
There's a
mucho
lot
mejor
of
hecho
stuff,
en Black
especially
Mesa,
in
todo el
Zen,
final.
where
Es
you're,
mucho más
you're
largo
getting
también.
close to a first draft of some things, right? Because we just didn't have time, and we got to the end of the
Y se
game.
parece mucho
And
más a
so
lo que están diciendo,
we
por
considered
cierto,
not
a la idea
going to
original.
Zen, but
de lo que
the
querían
art
hacer.
concepts people did were so cool.
For the Zen textures, I was deeply inspired by electron microscope imagery, and we had so much of that regular structural
Eso es una
texture
imagen de
material that I
microscopio
wanted to do
electrónico,
something
eso
more
también.
organic. Insects as well. I think there's a lot of textures
son
that
en
were
blanco y
based
negro.
on beetles. That was
Si están
really
a color, o es microscopio óptico, o han
incredibly
sido
challenging
coloreadas
levels
después.
to make because that editor was not friendly for organic shapes.
I built the little behaviors for the tree that hits you if you get too close, and the light stalk that kind of hides. But Ken did a bunch of AIs there, the floating controller guys.
And the flying guys were great, but you had to set up air nodes for them to travel properly. I prototyped a lot, and some of those prototypes were used in the final battle, I believe, and also for the Gonard, which I think Randy did.
We, at some point, have to stop polishing. At some point, we have to, like, it is what it is. And if the player hasn't had fun up until that point, well, then we failed. They're not going to get to that point, so who cares? It just has to finish, and it did.
Yeah, and there's always Half-Life 2 to win them back.
I love that sensation of being alone in an alien dimension, but the experience that people really liked in the game was scientists pop up and Barney pops up and you have companions and you have this feeling of companionship.
Es súper
around you
bonito
with all the
además,
other stuff
en
that's
el,
going on.
en el, bueno,
So a
el
lot of
remake en
people
Black
miss
Mesa,
that,
Jen,
which
es
I
súper
understood,
bonito, el
and
fondo y demás.
I think if we'd had thought about the ending from the beginning, we would have figured out some ways to do that a little more.
Tenía que salir en el 97 y salió a finales del 98, Fueron a México a tomar unos taquitos, míralos.
I remember coming
¿Os
back
acordáis
from
cuando te ibas de viaje
downtown
con tu
Cabo,
familia y hacías fotos
very
con una
drunk,
puta
and
cámara
then
y no sabías qué
running
habías hecho
to
hasta
the
que
beach,
llegabas
but
a
didn't
casa y lo
know there was
revelabas?
like a 6-foot retaining wall there, so I just went
Te
right
ibas con una
over.
bolsa de...
And then I was hurting so
de
much I
esto que me
slept
sale.
the night where I fell. Yeah, I woke
¿Cómo
up
se
the
llama?
next
Que no me
morning,
sale.
it was like a really
Decir,
stiff neck.
en el rollo de imprimir, no me sale la palabra. Los carretes.
I remember
Ibas con un montón de
after
carretes y
we'd
volvías con
gone
una bolsa llena de
final
carretes
on
y lo
the-
llevabas a la tienda y
on
le
the game.
decías, toma.
I was home
Y volvías
one
al día
morning,
siguiente y
you
te
know,
daban un
taking a
montón de
shower, and
fotos.
my
Y
wife
tú,
asked me,
gracias.
you know, like, it's done. Is it any good? Is the game any fun? Like, I don't know. Like, I hope so. You know?
I don't think it's exaggerating by saying if any one of the crew had disappeared for a month, we wouldn't have shipped. You know, it didn't matter who they were. You know, everybody was mission critical.
My inspiration from Valve, what I really took away with me was that the thing that is most important to me is what are we making? Coming in as a texture artist, you don't have a lot of expectation that you're going to get to influence that. And I was able to have quite a bit of influence on the what.
Tengo el
It
juego
was so
físico, lo
fun
tengo
to
por
work
ahí, los
with the
juegos de
people
PC.
who were making
Tengo
Half-Life.
la caja,
The collection
tengo
of
caja de
people were
cartón, de
diverse,
sierra
at
y luego
least,
tengo una
like,
versión
in
con,
their
con caja de
professional
plástico.
backgrounds was kind of all over the
Por ahí,
place.
está por el
And so
armario allí.
figuring out how to work with all those people, but also just the fact that we had hired really stellar people who were good at collaborating, like the conscientious people, deeply passionate about what they wanted to create,
that just was a recipe for a professionally, like, really good time.
It seems to me that one of the things that good games do is make 2 games worth of stuff and then throw away the bad game. And fortunately, like, Valve was able to do that. A lot of companies couldn't do that, but backstopped by Gabe and Mike, you know, Valve could afford to do that.
I always have absolutely nothing interesting to say when people say, would you reflect on your legacy? Like, I really don't look back a whole lot. I'm always excited by the future, right? So to me, it's like I can look back at the things we did, but to me, they're just sort of like...
Me parece muy bien. Y me alegro mucho de que habéis hecho el Source 2 y tal, pero por el amor de Dios, ¿podéis volver a hacer videojuegos, tío? De verdad lo digo. O sea, por el amor de Dios. O sea, tenéis genios ahí metidos. Podéis hacer videojuegos, tío. Hicisteis el Artifact, que fue una pedazo de basura infame. Half-Life Alyx es juegardo. Que es verdad, es juegardo. Pero coño. Ahora estáis con el Counter-Strike 2 este. Me parece muy bien. A tope con el Counter, pero coño. Portal 3. O una nueva IP, me da igual, tío. Compraron a los de Camposanto. Los de Camposanto hicieron Firewatch. Empezaron su siguiente juego. Entraron en Valve, se pusieron a trabajar en Half-Life Alyx y su juego desapareció y nunca más se supo. Y la gente de Camposanto, que eran especialistas en cosas narrativas, nada más. Nunca... Es como, joder, Left 4 Dead 3. Portal 3. De hecho, el escritor principal de Portal hace poco dijo, oye, me estoy haciendo mayor. O sea, si hay que hacer un Portal 3, hay que hacerlo ya, porque el pavo creo que tiene 60 y tantos ya. O sea, dijo, oye, que igual me muero. O sea, vamos a hacer Portal 3 de una puta vez. No sé, cosas así. Que es verdad, y entiendo a Gabe en el sentido de, oye, si no aparece esa spark, ¿no? Esa chispa creativa y no hay nadie que quiera liderar un team y hacer el juego y tal, lo puedo entender. Pero, joder, da como pena, ¿no? Una empresa con tantos recursos, con tanta gente que podría hacer tantas grandes cosas, con su propia plataforma para sacar el juego. Da como pena de decir, joder. No sé. Que ahora han tenido mucho éxito con la Steam Deck y sacan otra... Y el Counter funciona que flipas. Y Dota funciona que flipas. Y Steam como plataforma pues también funciona súper bien. Y lo que tú quieras. Pero es una pena porque parece que Valve es más una tienda de videojuegos. O ahora, o sea que Steam. O sea, Valve ahora mismo parece que Valve solo es Steam. Como que Steam es lo único que hacen. Y es como que da un poco de pena, tío. Ya, yo la Steam Deck pensaba que no sería un éxito. Honestamente. Porque ya hablé. Creo que cuando anunciaron Steam Deck yo comenté que me imaginaba que sería algo muy, muy, muy de nicho. O desaparecería. Porque, si os acordáis, no sé si os acordáis, Valve sacó PCs. ¿Os acordáis de los PCs de los PCs que tú en Steam, tú te podías meter en Steam y comprar un PC y te llegaba a tu casa? ¿Os acordáis? Eso desapareció. Eso duró 3 meses o algo así. Y el mando que sacaron, yo lo tengo. El mando que sacaron desapareció también. ¿Sabes? Y el Steam Link también desapareció. Todo eso, o sea, como que salió y a los 2 días... desaparecieron. Es como, vale, pues cuando anunciaron la Steam Deck dije, hostia, pues esto no va a funcionar, o sea, no tiene... Pero la Steam Deck parece que es full suya y ha funcionado muy bien. De esto de realidad virtual, el Valve Index también ha funcionado súper bien. Y la Steam Deck 2, esta nueva, que bueno, no es la Steam Deck 2, es la OLED, más o menos igual de potente, gasta menos batería, o sea que dura más la batería porque creo que la CPU está hecho a menos nanómetros, entonces es más eficiente. Y en fin, pero bueno, que han sacado una revisión. En el tiempo en el que la Switch sigue a lo suyo, Valve ha sacado 2 Steam Decks. Pero bueno, sea como fuere, me da penilla, la verdad. Que puede hacer lo que quiera, es su puta empresa y son sus IPs y que haga lo que quiera, pero me da pena.
That's just how I'm wired, right?
Ya está, si esto es sobre Half-Life, no sobre Valve, pero bueno, como lo sacaron ellos el otro día, este documental, pues genial. Bueno, creo que Valve hizo sus propias Steam Machine, hicieron una, ellos hicieron alguna como más personal y luego daban como una certificación de Steam Machine cuando empresas de terceros montaban, madre mía, horas he pasado yo jugando a esta versión. Eso, que podías como con una configuración específica podías tener una certificación de Valve para hacer una Steam Machine. Pero aquello funcionó mal, no acabó siendo... Blast 1. A mí me gustaba mucho más Blast 2, obviamente. Yo exagero, si digo que cuando el Counter 1.3, 1.4 y 1.5, igual me pasé, yo qué sé, tío, 400 horas en el ciber. Literal, compraba el vale, que eran 10 euros, 8 horas. En el ciber al que yo iba, eran 10 euros, 8 horas. La peña fumaba en el ciber muchísimo. O sea, yo tenía ahí, no me acuerdo,